prejudice, and then you have discrimination. I think all kind of roll together, and oftentimes we interchange the words, but they don't actually match up with their actual true meanings. So if we're talking stereotype, that's the idea that you don't like something, something isn't right, it makes you feel some kind of way. When you think of prejudice, you think about the feeling that you have based on that idea. And then discrimination is that point where there's an actionable activity. You've done something or not done something based on how you feel about that person or the idea you might have about that situation. That's the action that comes from it. And that leads to all of the other things and where the problems actually occur. And I will say before, I'm sorry, Dr. K, before I throw the mic to her, and also too, we all have prejudice. So it's not one of those things where it's, oh, just this population has prejudice or these particular people have prejudice, but we all have it. It's when we do the action is where the problems come in. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr. K.
No problem. And just sort of carrying that forward, that discrimination is that thought and that process about, or that thought process about someone based on their identities. And then that harassment, discrimination is an action, but harassment is an action too. And it comes in multiple forms. So someone, making a offensive joke or a racist joke or a sexist joke or leaving signage or threats, those are all forms of harassment. So it's that how someone acts out their discriminatory, thoughts. The harassment is one of the ways they do that with some of the examples I just gave.
So we're going to talk about bias. So obviously, I think when we think about bias, it may or may not be actionable, at least in terms of policy. When I actually, with Dr. Shabazz, talking about harassment, a repeated nature of ongoing bias incidents and things like that could lead to harassment, but often the one-time incidents of someone says something that's of a biased nature based on race, whatever, or something, is done that way. Certainly it's offensive. Certainly it's may require attention, probably should have attention. But when I think of the bias incidents, particularly in terms of the bias incident reporting, a lot of those issues are things that aren't necessarily something that the university would act on in terms of a violation of policy where there's a conduct issue. Typically, there are something we might look to in terms of creating some understanding around the offensive nature of the conduct. And maybe to understand that some things that are said in terms of bias can be more implied versus direct. Is also the fact that some of the things people said that feel like bias because it's towards a certain group also sort of cross over into issues around academic freedom, free speech. Again, troubling, difficult to deal with, but those are also realities of some of the bias incidents compared to the repeated nature kind of issues, which again can move into harassment. So maybe the final comment would be some instances of bias can in nature be discrimination, be harassment. Not all incidents would be. So
that's a really good point to address that it can be actionable versus just a thought or something that we have inherently. So do you have any suggestions for what if an individual experiences any one of these incidences in a virtual setting? And is there a difference between like an individual or a group setting? And how can we put in action for ourselves to protect ourselves if we don't have a witness present, or if we do have a witness present? It's a compounded question, so I can break it down again.
How about I throw out an option or like a scenario and then kind of talk through it. So like, for instance, let's just say you have a faculty member, one of your professors, says something that's off-putting or something that makes you feel some kind of way. Initially, I would always say, go to the professor and say, hey, you said A, B, and C. This made me feel this sort of way. So at least giving them the opportunity to say, hey, you know what, I didn't know I said that. That was by mistake. Thank you for bringing that to me, which I believe the vast majority of our faculty probably would give you that response. If they're like, I don't know what you're talking about, get out of my face, on one of those occasions, that's where you take it to another level. But always start with, hey, something was shared, and this is exactly what you said. And just from my perspective, from my position in the world, this is how it kind of made me feel, and it might make others feel the same kind of way. So you may want to address that or make some changes. Oftentimes you may have faculty, and not in front of the class. Oftentimes we'll do it aggressively or angrily, or call someone out. No one likes to be called out. Even like, for instance, as a student, you don't like to be called out, neither do faculty. So I would do it after class in a one-on-one scenario where no one else could kind of hear, but definitely make sure that it is said and let that be the starting point.
Does anyone else on the panel have a thought?
Yeah, I was just going back to what you said initially about the online environment and what can be done. One of the first and foremost things is always record what happened, not necessarily via a recording like we're doing, but have your own notes so that you can make sure that you can reflect on what happened. Because I know a lot of times people are startled by, something that is said. And once they get to a point where they have a connection and can talk about it, they really don't remember all of the details. And that's because, depending on what was said, it could be traumatizing, right? So, and no trauma is big or small. Anything for an individual could perhaps be traumatizing. So I always say, make sure that you are, having a reflective moment where you are writing down what took place. If there is something that is a visual, as fast as we whip out our cell phones, if you have the opportunity, take a picture, because anything that is documented helps us be able to make sense out of it further, later, and or, to ask, or to comment back to that, either the professor. So if it was a PowerPoint slide that had something, questionable, or if there was, an image that popped up or whatever, we've seen a lot of groups being Zoom bombed recently. And so we do our best on the back end and we'll talk about, I'm sure, that process later, to really investigate those things. But we have to have, the documentation. We have to have the narrative, your truth of what has taken place, and then subsequently any supporting individual statements, whatever else that helps, for us to understand what took place. And I would even add to what David commented about, not necessarily calling somebody out on what happens in an open setting. And I would almost tug a little bit and say, sometimes you got to call in. So if there's a comment that's made that is a verbal comment to an entire class, or maybe there's a statement, you don't have to, initially say, well, hold up, I disagree with that. But what you could say is, can you speak about that a little bit more? Can you help me understand what it is that you're saying with this? Because I want to make sure that I'm interpreting what you're saying correctly. So that's not like calling them out, but it is having, them clarify what they're saying. Because again, I think one of the biggest issues with that bias piece is there's a lack of communication and awareness. And so if we kind of draw that out of someone and seek clarity, then, maybe that can be cleaned up, or maybe there is truly a problem.
I love that add on, Dr. K, where it's like, yeah, I've given you the opportunity to clarify it, and you either made it better or made it worse, which truly means you truly felt like this. Mm-hmm. So now you get that chance to redirect and readdress. So yeah, that's a good avenue.
I think really everything that our other two panelists have mentioned is what I was really going to say anyway. Just the point that, on one hand, any kind of these issues happen, no one should feel alone. There's resources, and we'll get into that in a minute. But in terms of reporting, in terms of if violation policy, the universities there, particularly Equal Opportunity Office and things like that. But at another level, just as was just shared by my two colleagues, there's an educational piece, there's a developing their own skills and confidence around this. There's the human element of, we all need to get more confident and develop skills to respond to these issues, because that's part of life. So I like the call-in idea. I like the idea of, can we talk about this further, maybe in a private setting, take if it's not the clear violation versus just someone's ignorance, someone's bigotry. Obviously, it's how you feel about it. It's how you, you know, your safety around that. But I think in many instances, we can develop the right skills and approaches to expand the conversation in a productive way to create understanding. And I think we want to reinforce that as much as obviously the official response when that needs to happen. So. And David just shared the link that I was about to share anyway, in terms of different places where you can report. So yeah.
Thank you so much for your responses. I definitely agree that, especially in this virtual setting and virtual atmosphere, it's hard to understand body language. It's hard to interpret what people are saying. There's a lot of misunderstanding going on. So it's definitely important. I really love the call in and clarify, like get to know what people are really actually addressing. Tevin, do you want to go with the next question?
Yes. So with our transition, more so to global education and the growing number of international students in our programs as well, and also study abroad opportunities. What if these discrimination or incidents happen while abroad and have been attacked in public? Are students protected by IU? And who can they talk with to advocate for them or walk them through these processes?
Okay, I'll just start that. Obviously, if it's a university activity, it's subject to sanction and other policies there. In terms of the actual what happens when abroad, obviously the right officials should be responsive in addressing it that way. But actually, my other two colleagues, I don't know, Dr. Shabazz, in terms of your travels, these things happen in terms of with students, but certainly the response is the same. It's just obviously the dynamics of it that are more of a challenge. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know through study abroad and international affairs, there are protocols in place. And so one of the things actually that we try to do in that regard is make sure that there's an awareness of what are some of the possibilities in other countries. So the visiting countries, and making sure that we understand what some rules and laws and what sort of socially acceptable are different, in other countries. And so we try to be mindful and educate our students before they go abroad, just about some of the things that they may experience. I know, in my travels, going to different places, I'm looked at very differently, and almost like as if I'm, super amazing or something, I don't know, or either as if I'm on display in certain countries. And so I know one of the approaches to that is really helping individuals understand how their identities could potentially be perceived abroad. Like to Dan's point, obviously our students are our students. And so whether they are here or there, they are still protected by the same means here. Now that, of course, will depend on the legality pieces of someone being, attacked abroad or whatever. But we as an institution would do whatever we needed to do to support that students and particularly make sure that they are get home safely.
Just a quick note on the chat, the question about the diversity website that has bias incidents, that just directs you to the Equal Opportunity Office report. So to answer that question, one of the reports on the OEO page is bias incidents, but there are other report mechanisms on that particular page. But the diversity page just directs you to that page anyway. So.
Thank you for that clarification. On the flip side to Tevin's question, what if it's an international student here and experience an incident in the community? What are they still protected by IU, or should they contact like local officials, or how do they go about that?
Anytime you're talking to community, it's kind of different. Let's just say if that international student is in an internship, and yes, then everything would kind of still fall under.
We're having a difficult time hearing you.
How about now?
Better. Yes.
Okay. I was saying that as far as international student, if they are here in Indy or here, closely related to IU and at an internship in those scenarios, yes, everything still falls under the IUPUI, the sanctions in which IUPUI kind of puts on outside entities that connect with us. However, if they're walking the streets, if they're at a grocery store, then that's just the nature of being in the community. So in those occasions, contacting the proper authorities if addressed or something where it's just inappropriate. And sometimes it's about how you address it yourself. Again, treat it just as you would if you were at home in your apartment, or if that person was in the park. There are no rules or regulations in the community.
Great, thank you. And we're going to jump into our second polling question. You should see that pop up on your screen here soon, shortly. Waiting for a few more. Okay. So I'm just, so I'm just going to share these results of what we have. Then jumping into our next question, how do you distinguish between a microaggression and a simple mistake? What are the differentiators?
I would say that a microaggression could be a simple mistake on the basis of people having implicit bias. Some people are very aware of their biases and a lot of people are not. And it's so ironic that this presentation happened today because I have a prime example. We have utility workers outside right now who are, I don't know, doing some work. And it was 3 white males and one of them came and asked me to move my car. Well, my license plate on my vehicle says Dr. K. And so I go outside and move my car. And one of the workers said, "Oh, is your husband a doctor?" And I was like, "No, that would be me." And so then the next question was, "Oh," it literally, like they all 3 like looked like, "Oh," and then it was, well, what do you do? Right? So now I have to credential and validate, because I've already gone against. So that was clearly an example of an implicit bias. He was just asking in his mind, just asking a question. "Oh, is your husband a doctor?" And then the shock was like, wait, hold on. And so what was taking place there, right? So that's the bias that's coming out and I'm receiving it as a microaggression, right? Because I'm like, I'm so sick of these people thinking that, because this is not the first time that it's happened to me because of my license plate. Somebody rolled up on the side of me. Like, are you a doctor? So like people have that perception and that bias, and that what he did was his bias, and how the action that he took by verbalizing his bias became the microaggression that I experienced. Does that make sense? So back to the question, how do you distinguish between the two? I think sometimes there are people who just simply don't know, like in his mind, he probably had no thought that what he was asking me was a microaggression or was his implicit bias and how I would see it as a microaggression. Now, if I would have taken the time to educate him, I didn't feel like it today because I have that right to not feel like educating you. So I didn't feel like it. But if I had taken that time to do that, and if he continues to perpetuate that, guess what? That's not a simple mistake anymore. that is now not implicit bias, that's explicit bias, because now you know better, but you continue to choose to still do the same.
But in terms of the question, at one level, I'm not sure it matters if it's a simple mistake or if it's a microaggression. And because it's obviously it's something that's the opportunity to correct, particularly if it's at the level of misunderstanding. So I guess what I would add to that would be, what's the intent behind it? If there's clear intent, that's one thing. If it's just ignorance, it's still something to address. And then it goes down to how deep and harmful and unsafe you are in terms of addressing it versus other actions that might be taken versus that. When I for whatever reason, when it comes down to, opportunity to correct, when I think of intent, it's absolutely right. It then becomes very explicit. But some things you just know are even if it's not totally clear, that the intent was to be harmful and to get a reaction. For whatever reason, what comes immediately to mind is, for the last year or so, we've had what's called the coronavirus. That is not the China virus. And so there's a clear distinction there, and intent behind that, despite whatever one would say that, because it came from China. No, there's an intent to send a message that's harmful. So, but again, bottom line, there's opportunity to address it if it's in the right context to be able to address it. So.
We have time for me to jump in just a little bit on that one also.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give some premise on this that doesn't give anyone an excuse. So we're in Indianapolis, Indiana. We are surrounded by rural America. If any of you all have been here more than a couple months and have actually been on our campus, there are tons of people who've never had any interaction with a person of color prior to coming to IUPUI. I say all that not to give an excuse, but to give the premise of your classmates a lot of times are asking questions and saying things because they have no other connection other than what they've seen on television. Still not giving that excuse. That's where, like the question in the chat says, is it our responsibility to educate others? It depends. If we're talking about fellow students, if we're talking about that occasion where that faculty member may have said something off-putting, yes. And is it exhausting? Absolutely. Is it upsetting? Yes. Is it something that we all get tired of? Yes. But if you don't address it, it continues and it perpetuates and it adds on to it. And then if we approach with the attitude, it's like, oh, they are angry. So it's like, I was just asking a question where they didn't see a problem in asking that question, but then our response when it comes back is to being nasty or, very negative or aggressive. They add that to the idea they already had about us. So I try to educate as much as possible, just because I want you to leave speaking with me as that big black guy was, he was really answering my question, or, I didn't think that anymore, or he cleared that up, and then is able to go thinking of us in a different light. Yes, it's upsetting. Yes, it is exhausting. But I feel like at least a little bit that I do, if I can educate a few as we push through, maybe it can make us as people a little bit better.
Thank you for that point. I also wanted to share like a story. So friends of mine, we always talk about how microaggressions aren't micro for us, like the impact extends beyond the incident. And so can you guys talk about ways that we can, I guess, one, approach this conversation to educate, but then also among ourselves, like how can we best just let it go off of our shoulders, because it never really leaves, right? Like once you've experienced it, you can remember it and recall it for a long time, and it's not a microaggression. And so the other person is thinking it is this simple question, but really we're impacted for the rest of our lives. So do you have any thoughts on that?
I would say the acknowledgement of the impact. I talk to students all the time who sometimes just want to talk through their experience. And what I find often is that people try to minimize it themselves, the impact of how it made you feel and what that experience was. And in ways, gaslight yourself. and talking yourself out of the fact that it actually happened, which is so detrimental, because I think that that's what leads to this buildup of trauma, you know, that's trapped in our bodies because we don't want to address it, right? So I think one of the best ways to deal with it is absolutely to acknowledge what impact it has on you and what you need to be able to effectively heal from that. And so sometimes that could be saying something to someone, or if you're exhausted from saying something, sometimes that could be, you know, whatever other form of self-care, radical self-care that you engage in, so that you can deal with that. There is no recipe, there is no cookie cutter. It literally has to be an individual journey. But I think saying, no, this did happen to me, I'm not going to minimize it. I've got to do something about it, whether that do something is addressing it, you know, with the other party, or, you know, addressing it with yourself so that you can kind of process it. But I think we compartmentalize so much stuff because we're so used to things happening to us. Just like I compartmentalized this guy out here, but I did come in and tell my husband, because I was like, I'm so sick of this blankety blank. And, you know, that I had to ask him, like, what just happened? What just happened? So, like, you know, that was my processing it so that I wouldn't be on here angry.
What I'm going to share is not necessarily right, but it helps me. In situations where I know you've hit me with a good one, meaning, I'll give an example. I had a student who was leaving IUPUI, was going home her freshman year, because in her exact words was, there are more colored people here than I was expecting. Now, again, this is a person from rural America who's never been around us. So I explained, you know, IUPUI, urban campus, the nature of a diverse campus, and why this is important. And in the end, I even inserted, you know, hey, you know, if you say that phrase, you know, that can make people like me very upset, you know, and it can make us feel, you know, it comes off as racist. And I explained how the statement made me feel. So to me, I'm sharing the trauma. If she was genuine about learning more, she left with trauma also. Again, not saying it's right, or not saying it was the right thing to do, but saying that now we've shared it, and I at least feel like, okay, you better understand because I put you in an uncomfortable setting. And that's what we learn. We learn in places where we're uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable, she was uncomfortable. We both learned something about each other, but she left with that bit and took that back to wherever she was going, to say, hey, I can't use this terminology as I was taught growing up, or in my own community, I can't use this with everyone else. So it at least made me feel better about the occasion, because I left that with her to be able to make those corrections. And hopefully, again, if it's genuine, she'll share that with someone else and express that and be able to teach someone else when it's used. Can't say it's right, but it worked for me. Sharing your feeling. This is how you made me feel about it. And I know as people of color, we don't share our feelings. That's something that in nature, just so many of us are, and I'm stereotypical, you know, most men, but there are a lot of men who won't share how they feel. I'm okay with telling you this, based on what you said, this is how it made me feel. Leave with that, take that with you. Just something that I do.
We touched on a little bit about self-care. And one thing that we're starting to notice way more now, when you turn on the TV or you get on social media, it's there. Like now you get to see it, now you experience it. How do you draw the line of advocating, but also seeing bias incidents and discrimination happen on a virtual setting, on the TV? And like, what are some practices that you kind of use to cope and just kind of separate yourself away from that?
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, first of all, talk about TV, media, social media. I'm the last person to be expert on that. I don't know about practices. I think it's choices. I think it's knowing what's worth your time and what you can influence and what would otherwise just drive you crazy and would just drag you down. I mean, you know, so, I mean, I know people do respond to every post or every kind of response and find themselves getting into the argument. And I just don't think that's productive, and it can drag you down versus, oh, here's an opportunity I could say something or ask a question. The call in, I really like that idea. And where I may know something, or it's with a friend that has, or an acquaintance that have some level of trust with. There's more here, but I just think it's the choices of, and maybe choosing very wisely about, I can engage here and be okay with that. But if I engage here, I'll just get deeper into it and it'll be even harmful to me. So I see it choices as a starting point.
Yeah, and I would say two practices that I have, or kind of like three. One is guard your gates. So eye gates, ear gates, mouth gates. Guard your gates because it helps you, when enough is enough, right? So when you cannot take any more, and being able to make that, like Dan said, choice of making sure you are protecting, if no one can insulate you like you can. And so if you take it upon yourself to make sure that you're guarding your gates, that helps you. I also always say that I protect my peace at all costs. If I can't have power over it, it cannot have power over me. That is my mantra. And I do that because I think sometimes we get so consumed with wanting to make change and force change that we exhaust ourselves and expose ourselves to, unhealthy behaviors, unhealthy, minds, everything. And so I try to live by that. And so some people think that I can be like nonchalant. No, it's just that I literally evaluate it. I ask my question, can I have power over this? Like right now? And if the answer is no, then it will not have power over me and consume my thinking and everything. Doesn't mean that I don't act. It just means that I'm very, conscious about the choices that I make in those actions. And I think the last one, which is probably the most important for me, is therapy. I engage in a variety of reflective and opportunities to connect with someone. I have a regular therapist. I'm not ashamed of it. And it helps me be able to process and navigate. And then I do a lot of reading and self kind of like reflection type of activities and journals to kind of help purge me of all of the stuff that has come in. That I feel like it's important to process and get back out.
I'll add on to hers just really quickly. Two things that I'd use is one, as a professional, I know I'm talking to students who are looking to be attorneys or use the law in various ways. You're going to hear the world of different things. You'll learn as a professional to take your coat off at the end of the day and hang it up and leave work at work. Meaning all of the many things that go on at work, no matter whether they were personal or professional in your work. It's like that happened during the day. I'm going home, I'm gonna play with my kids, I'm gonna watch some TV, I'm gonna sit out in the yard, whatever, but I'm not gonna let that sit in me and stew in me to upset me. That's helped me work as a professional. Strongly encourage you to have some of that as you grow into your profession. But then at the same time, you have that when you've guarded your gates as best you can, but you have 2020 happens and everything that we saw last summer. So where you look, they're infiltrating your gates. In those scenarios, much like Dr. K, I found places where I could get therapy, and that was actually the student groups. So being able to see what you all were saying and watching you all and seeing you all protest, that was my therapy last year. I had to pull away from the television because watching the news every day from March to May was rough. I'm not gonna lie. So sometimes it's just pulling away from everything that could filter into you, just being able to say, you know what, I need time to myself versus taking all of this in.
Thank you so much for your responses. I definitely think we've been having some great discussions on discrimination, harassment, and bias. And now I think it's important that we equip you all with resources. And so our last poll question is, do you know where you can report? So Tevin, if you want to pull that up, please. Okay, so we've got majority of our voters, our votes in. And it looks like we don't. So it's a perfect time to first ask, what are the resources that we have available to assist victims, to assist allies, so that we can help ourselves?
Well, as far as reporting, the link that was shared earlier if you go to that page, has a number of options for reporting. And I mean, I think the two most to talk about most would be the OEO reporting process, which I will actually defer to David in a minute to talk more about, but certainly in terms of discrimination, harassment, those sort of things. Bias incidents, in other words, something was said or done that reflects some bias towards an individual, yourself. Doesn't have to be you, it could be a classmate, whatever. It may or may not be actionable in terms of dealing with a conduct, discipline, what have you, but just creating, we want to have a safe, inclusive, belonging culture. So we want to know where things happen in the classroom or the workplace, whatever, that impacts on that. So just, even the simplest thing that really what we just talked about, that, I'll just let it go, but it may be something that's important. Nothing may happen to it because it is something where we couldn't do much with it. Otherwise, it may just be something where there's at least some conversation around it. Or the other thing I'd say too is that you're not sure where to report. I know that I sort of, along with Khalilah, we monitor the bias incident, that if something just came in just recently that it really wasn't biased, it really was discrimination. So if you report it in the wrong portal, so to speak, no problem. The people who look at those things will make sure it gets referred to the right place. So you can't go wrong by, make your best guess, I guess, or just look at what the different reporting things are, particularly OEO versus the bias incident, and start there. But again, we work together to make sure it's referred to the right place. So David, I don't know what more you'd say about the OEO reporting, so.
Absolutely. So just know that every time you submit a report, it is reviewed by someone. It doesn't just drop into an imaginary bucket and no one does anything with it. Once those reports are received, they are sent to several of 3 or 4 different investigators. For them, they're going to probably, if it's egregious, they're going to reach out to you to hear more about it. Even though you may have created a very detailed report, there's still some one-on-one communication that happens from there. The point that I like to bring out in this is people automatically think, well, this situation happened, this person should be fired. And that's not always the case. When think education and training, as far as a unit of all of IUPUI, in a lot of these scenarios, there's some type of training or educational that might happen and you won't know about it. And that's where the piece of disconnect that a lot of people get frustrated about is, oh, I made this report and nothing happened. Not necessarily. If you made the formal report and they checked in with you, they're not going to tell you, hey, X faculty member has been written up, or has been fired, or has been given training. They're going to say, well, we'll take care of it, and from here, based on just like your personal records aren't passed out and shared with everyone else, neither is that faculty, staff, or other students' information. So you'll never know what has happened to that person, but just know that there are several different options that person can go through for, not necessarily, I don't want to call it a discipline, but a corrective behavior or a teaching opportunity. So it is checked on and worked on. It should feel different, and just know that I'll put this in there also. Retaliation is not acceptable. So if you feel like, hey, this happened to me in particular, I reported it, and now something is happening to me, some type of behavior I'm receiving, and it feels specifically directed at me, that could be retaliation, which then just file a separate report on, hey, I filed this earlier, now I'm filing this as a retaliation based on what I put out initially. So don't be afraid to share your information. Document, make your report. If you feel like this behavior is continuing, make it again. But I am a firm believer that if you're seeing something and corrective measures, you're not receiving changes that you need to see, document again.
Yeah, and I would, reiterate a couple of things. One, in my capacity, in my role, I make a point of connecting with students so that you are reaffirmed in your experience. So if you have experienced something and you're unclear, you're like, okay, this made me feel this kind of way, but I'm not sure, which route to go. You can always contact me and I will listen to you and validate your story and your experience, and B, kind of give you some direction. To David's point, not everything elevates immediately to the level of, an instant termination. But the thing that probably saddens me the most is when we do like the campus climate survey, or when we look at our summary data for our bias incidents. And I know for a fact that many, many, many more students are experiencing bias incidents on our campus, but do not report it. But we're an institution that thrives on data. A lot of institutions do, and so no matter how big or small you think it is, I absolutely recommend that you take 5 minutes out and report it, because when you report it, that gives me more ammunition to go and say, yo, we got to do something about this, because 10 students have reported on, this one incident. I'm not saying here, go blow up, the thing with false stuff or whatever, but I'm really encouraging you to, submit that information so that we can help you. If you don't know where to start, what that looks like, Dan mentioned earlier, he and I and another colleague, when you submit a bias incident report, it's our eyes that look at it. And we help to determine the next steps of that. Sometimes those next steps, I will pick up the phone and I will call a staff or faculty member or their supervisor from an educational perspective. It might not be punitive, but to say, hey, this is what your staff person or that faculty person is having, an experience, and they can then go and talk to that faculty person. So kind of, again, doesn't mean that nothing is happening. But the more things are shared with us and made a formal incident report, the more we have on record so that we can actually do something about it. And, everyone wants opportunities for advancement in various ways. And so, people have to answer to some of the experiences or, that they've had with faculty or with students or the community abroad, because it could be, a student against a student, or all of those things are, pieces that are out there. So we just want to make sure that you are aware of the resources that are available to you. And then, if you need further support and assistance, we are also available to do that. And so one of the hardest things is people thinking, like I said earlier, I don't really know if this really happened. Did I really understand this? Am I feeling, is what I'm feeling, what actually happened? And I'm like, absolutely. The fact that you have that feeling is that. And so sometimes you just need that encouragement to be able to persist and move through and know how to navigate those situations. And that's what we're here for.
Maybe I could add that there might be reluctance to file something because, well, what will happen with it? And I want people to know, but I'm not sure I want my name attached to it, whatever. I mean, we're very careful about how we handle the information. We follow up, thank you for filing this, but what goals would you have that would you want us to do? Can we bring this forward to someone's attention, or is it just you want us to know just so we're aware of it in case there's other incidents? So I think that's another point, is to understand that, coming forward to us is different than coming forward in front of the whole university, whatever. We're very careful about, protecting confidences and working with people in terms of how we handle the information from the point that you filed something, so.
And I also, sorry, Tevin, I put in the chat that we have peer wellness mentors. I serve as a peer wellness mentor for the IU School of Medicine, as well as for the graduate emissaries for student diversity. And I know that there's some others of us on the call here too. So we have peers that we can talk to, or I think we're establishing more of a greater presence on campus, but we're here to speak on like a peer level and then refer out to official like documentation or just going through the pipeline. So.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing that. Are those resources designed to specifically serve individuals, or are they crafted to service the whole community? Is there a hotline students or faculty can use to report different incidents that is more immediate?
So the filing of discrimination, bias, or harassment is open to anyone who experiences our campus community or members of our campus community. So I know I can speak for the bias incidents. We've actually had incidents reports filed on individuals who work or attend the university, but a community member saw their post or their activity or whatever and deemed it one of those things. And so they submitted a report as a community member against someone who was a part of the IUPUI community. So yes, it's open, to everyone. Now, we don't necessarily have a hotline. There, of course, are email boxes. And, I know that there is the possibility still floating around of an ombudsman that Dan can probably speak to. But, we always say our everything is available on the web, of course, but then the behavioral consultation team, they do have, I believe, a phone number. But the majority of it, if you submit or need to submit something, you would do it electronically, pretty much for that paper trail.
Yeah, actually, so obviously some of these things can, of course, connect to more emergency situations. So don't forget, of course, campus police, don't forget those sort of things. Obviously, there's the issue of immediate emotional issues. So I guess for students, there's CAPS. So we don't want to ignore that, of course. There are others in terms of conduct issues that would be, again, dean of students, other reporting requirements there. So we're not minimizing those. And again, if it connects with the work we're talking about here, then we would know about it as much as if we hear it from our end as a bias report, we would report to those entities. So I think there's some more immediate responses that some of these other offices would provide. I would say discrimination harassment. I mean, obviously when the Equal Opportunity Office is aware of it, and it's more immediate, then they'll address it too. So I wouldn't call it hotline, but there are responses. And also real quickly, a caveat to my last comment about the bias report in terms of anonymity. Of course, there are issues around sexual harassment, sexual assault, Title IX, that, there are requirements of reporting there. So I just want to be clear about that, but even so, we'd want to, I know there's an effort to work with anyone with those issues to manage those. And that's not the area I'm most involved in, but maybe others could speak to that. But just so I'm clear that there can be some issues of the required reporting on certain issues, criminal issues and things like that. So.
Thank you. And so for our last question, what action items can those who benefited from the system take to promote these conversations and change around bias and harassment and discrimination? And then also as a campus and a community, what can we do to establish a sense of well-being for those who are impacted?
I would say, in terms of the first question, is to work hard to be seen as an ally, right? So of course, don't claim the identity or title for yourself. You want other people to see you as such, which means that if you do see something, try to do your part in addressing the behavior or reporting the behavior, not necessarily always addressing it. Because I think that's part of it. We have a lot of people who just are bystanders and choose not to intervene because they don't want to, put themselves at risk or whatever. But to me, that's one of the most important things that people who are benefits of the system or in positions of power because of their own identities is to step up and say something and speak to the oppressive experiences of other people. Don't take up space, but if you can create space for them, to be able to voice their concerns, and or if you can support them in doing so. Ask how you can support. Don't lead by just doing whatever you want to do to support them. But don't just be a bystander. Actively try to help dismantle some of this stuff.
Comment I have is what you're already doing. This forum today is what you can do more of. And at least in terms of myself and my two colleagues were always successful. In fact, I'm just about to put my contact information just as Khalilah did. But beyond that, I mean, us and many others are available for just conversations, education, training, putting together the appropriate group to have more conversation around it. It doesn't always have to have administrative people in it. It could be your own internal with whatever your group is. Reaching out to get more education is a key thing. So,
is your name pronounced Daenique?
Daenique, yes.
Daenique. As you indicated very earlier, you gave an example of something that everyone could do. You're sharing, and I'm not necessarily saying that from the benefit of it, but your knowledge. You're sharing that with others as a peer mentor. So if you've gained the benefit of understanding the systems of IU as a whole, how can you help is join Dept, become a peer mentor, become a tutor, not a tutor, or work at a Dept or even campus tours, all of those areas where you have student connections to be able to help if someone has a question or is in need, or helping someone to help someone else. All of those occasions happen by us being engaged in our campus. I know, of course, I know several of you all are UPnGO. Just because you're a graduate student doesn't mean that you don't have connections to our campus. So being able to make sure that you share your wealth of knowledge with everyone else, I think helps us all.
And I would just add to your second question about how you can help establish that sense of well-being and community on our campus. I would say reach out to the individuals who are here to try to form those relationships so that we can improve the campus. One of the things that I always cringe when I hear people say, administration is doing this and administration is doing that. And it makes me feel some sort of kind of way because, the reality is I am a part of administration, but I'm also trying to help, change some things on this campus. I'm a graduate of IUPUI. So, I know what the student experience is like, and I've been on campus for a very long time. So, I know I hold that title and I'm a part of administration, but I don't want to be lumped into the people that aren't doing anything to change our campus. And so we need our students, our undergrads and our grad students, to come on board, tell us what's wrong. I hardly ever hear from grad students who are telling me the issues that they're having. And so I can't advocate for you at these tables that I'm able, because of my position to be at, if I don't know what you're experiencing. So I think in terms of what you can do is make it a priority to see us as a partner in making the campus what you need it to be. I'm not against you, I'm for you. And I know many, many other people who are in the same position, but we need to know what your experiences are. We need to know, what you need to be more successful on campus. That's how we're going to make sure that, we do what we need to do to have you be able to be retained and get through. So don't suffer in silence. Don't only suffer with your peer group. Like legit pull that stuff up to us. And so that we can in fact help you.
Thank you. I think now that we know that there is a tool to actually submit our concerns, I'm pretty sure you'll be hearing a lot more from the graduate student population. Thank you so much to our panelists, as well as UPnGO, the McKinney School of Law, and Office of Equal Opportunity. This has been really informative, at least for me. I don't know if the audience has any last comments, if y'all want to just drop some things in the chat, if you want to say thank you to our panelists or any questions that you have, they're here to connect with you. Tevin, do you have any last words?
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you all for pulling from your experiences and lived experience, and also your professional experiences as well, to be able to speak on these challenges that we continue to face throughout the workplace and within the community and also in the classroom. I think it was very helpful for us. I'm new here too, so this is my first year. So learning about these different resources, especially during the pandemic, we're not on campus, you might feel shy or feel a way that, you're not immediately on campus. So it may be a little bit different. So I do want to thank you all for doing that for us.
Yes, and I also wanted to add, so this recording will be on the UPnGO YouTube page. Our YouTube page is UPnGO at IUPUI. Feel free to follow us also on social media, Instagram, UPnGO IUPUI. I'll drop it in the chat, as well as we'll be sending a resource document that we've compiled a list of glossary of terms, as well as all of the links that are here, and the contact information of our panelists will be sent out to everyone who joined today, as well as our UPnGO listserv. So if any of the UPnGO members could just quickly drop our Instagram, it'll help me quickly get that out. But I had a really great time. It was super informative for me. So can everyone give a round of applause to our panelists? Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, you all. Y'all have a good one. Hang in there. I know finals and the end of the semester is here. So finish strong.
Bye, everyone.